Hi friends, I'm Felicia. Welcome here. Yeah, so I'm going to be doing my July, June, and July wrap up. So I'm just going to tell you the books that I read in June, and we'll just work our way through. Okay, so the first book that I finished in June was The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. It's chronologically book number 1 in the Chronicles of Narnia. I have very strong thoughts about this. It has chilled a bit over the years, but my very strong opinion is that if one is reading the Chronicles of Narnia for the very first time, they need to read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first. They have to. You have to read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first if it's your first time reading the Chronicles of Narnia, because if you read The Magician's Nephew first, yes, chronologically it's first, but The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was written first, and so then things get spoiled, in my opinion, and then you lose some of that magic that you had from the first book. I mean, after the first time reading it, read it in whatever order you want, publication or chronological, I don't care. Just for your first time, you cannot read The Magician's Nephew first. Okay, that is my very strong opinion. Don't at me, because I'm right. Okay, but after that, whatever. Everyone has their preferences. My preference is publication order, but I have... Wow, I've been talking about this for a long time. But I have a box collection. The whole series in one Audible book that I got, yeah, on Audible, and so it is in chronological order, and so because it doesn't matter to me because I've read the Chronicles of Narnia so many times, I'm just gonna listen to it in order. Okay, so The Magician's Nephew, it's narrated by Kenneth Branagh, and he did a great book. He did a great job narrating the book. And I really enjoyed it, and it's been a while. It's been quite a few years actually already since I've last read the Chronicles of Narnia. So when I kind of don't have another book that I really want to listen to in audio, I'm just gonna slowly work my way through those. So I really enjoyed it. Okay. The next book that I read was for my In Real Life book club, and we read Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. So this is my second Agatha Christie book ever, and my second one this year, and I really enjoyed this one. I've not seen any movies or anything, did not know the story, but then somehow not too long before I started reading it, I was spoiled to the way that the crime ends up in the end, so that was frustrating. But even though I knew that I tried to put it out of my mind, and it was okay, but I still had it in the back of my mind, so that was kind of crappy that happened. But I did still really enjoy it. I still couldn't figure out how it worked, even though I kind of knew that. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Okay, so I think my next Agatha Christie book that I will pick up someday will be Death on the Nile, I think, because that's the next one that jumped out. There was a preview for it at the end of my ebook that I read, but I did read half of it ebook, and then I listened to the other half because the audiobook's narrated by Dan Stevens, who we already know that I love. So, and then also Kenneth Branagh, previously mentioned, is the director and I think star of Murder on the Orient Express, the one that came out a couple years ago, and the next one that he's making apparently is Death on the Nile. So that's my next Agatha Christie book. Okay, so the next book that I finished in June was Winning God by Lauren F. Winner, and this was my nonfiction read for maybe Midrash all the way back in May, and I finished it in June, and I absolutely adored it. I love her writing. We all know this. If you don't know that, hi, I love Lauren Winner. Okay, so this is kind of feels like a collection of, not a collection of essays, but kind of each chapter is like a different section on ways that we experience God, and not in like the really common ways that we're used to thinking about it, but like different ways that are still in the Bible, but not the ones that are like over and over, you know? And like the first chapter is about like trying to relate to God as a friend and like having a friendship with God. And like just when I read this, it was absolutely what I needed to read at the time. And still, like, I could read this again now and just be just as moved by it. One of the ways that she talks about meeting God is like through laughter, or through clothing, which is interesting, and just like how our everyday experiences of these kinds of things, how they actually can bring us into a closer relationship with God, and by like having that awareness of that connection, that it just brings us to like a deeper sense of worship, which I absolutely loved. So I would really recommend this book if that kind of thing interests you. You might not agree with everything that she says, like every single point of her theology, but for the most part, I'm okay with it, and I love her writing so much that, and her viewpoint, so much that it doesn't matter. Storm's sitting on my desk and rubbing her face on my chair, and then like looking at me like this. It's hilarious. Anyways, she's such a weirdo. Okay, the next book that I finished was The Rosie Project by Graham Simsian, and I totally just picked this up on a whim off of my bookshelf because I needed an audiobook to listen to, and I found this one on Scribd. And I had this book for a long time and bought it years ago from Book Outlet, and I wasn't sure anymore if I was actually gonna like it, and I was pleasantly surprised at how much I did enjoy it. It was still like, I didn't love it, but I did enjoy it a lot more than I thought I would, especially at the beginning, because this is a story told from the perspective of a man with, he's on the autism spectrum. It's never stated, or he's never diagnosed with anything specific, but the author in the back, he says that there's like an author note or whatever. He was writing with the intent that this character was on the autism spectrum. So the main character, Don, is on the autism spectrum, and he is in his late 30s, and he's decided that it's time to get a wife, and he has no luck with women, and so he decides that he never finds women that are right for him, and so he decides that he's going to create this rigorous questionnaire kind of thing to filter out appropriate candidates of women to be his wife. Does that make sense? And so he meets this woman, Rosie, and he quickly determines that she is not appropriate, but she has something that intrigues him in his profession with genetics, and so he decides that he's gonna help her. So like at first it was really hard to get used to Don's voice because he says things just like so bluntly, and he often is observing people's physical appearance, and like every new person that he meets, he's estimating their BMI, which is like, okay, rude. But the book never really went anywhere that I found super problematic with that. I never felt offended by it. I was just like wary that it would be like maybe get there, but it never did. So yeah, I enjoyed it, but like also I don't feel motivated to go. I think there are 2 more books. I'm not motivated to read them, but this one was fine. Works as a standalone, so yeah. Okay, the next book that I read. This is probably my most anticipated book of the year, I think. So I read it right away when I pre-ordered it. The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I absolutely loved this book. I need John Green to just write so much nonfiction because this was just wonderful. I've been a fan of his for many years. I've watched the Vlog Brothers channel for years, and I love him and Hank, and I love them together, and they're just every, Tuesday, Friday, it's just like a little bright point in my day to watch their videos. It started as a podcast, and I don't listen to podcasts, so I have never listened to the podcast. A lot of these stories are from there, but there are new ones here also that are not on the podcast. So We Are Living, if you didn't know this, I didn't actually know this until he announced this book, and I was like, what the heck? We are living in the Anthropocene age era, and so basically he's taking things, everyday things, and reviewing them on a 1 to 5 star scale, and then he writes a little essay about them, about the things, and also kind of like bringing his own life stories into there. And I just absolutely loved it, and it's so heartfelt and sincere and joyful, and I just absolutely loved it. Okay, so some of the things I'm just gonna look. Diet Dr. Pepper, Canada Geese. I laughed at that one. Penguins of Madagascar, Piggly Wiggly, Super Mario Kart, Viral Meningitis, a Wintry Mix, etc., etc. Okay, and like there are like some serious things and some not serious things, and it's just delightful. And also I found it just like supremely comforting as well, because he wrote a lot of this towards the beginning of the pandemic, and so just to have like those moments and those concerns, you know, a year and a half down the road, to have those things kind of immortalized in this book feels really special. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I am really thankful for this book. It has brought me a realization that I love little short essay kind of things to read before bed. Like I read a story or an essay or two in this every night before bed, and it just was perfect. So yeah, I would really highly recommend this. If you don't like John Green's fiction, you still might like this, so I would recommend at least getting it from the library and giving it a try, because I think this book is spectacular. Is that a high enough praise? It should be. Okay, the last book that I finished in June, I have to remember to breathe sometimes in between my words, Since You've Been Gone by Morgan Matson. Okay, so, guys, I just don't enjoy YA contemporary anymore the way that I used to, and it's kind of sad. I used to just like love it so much, and now it's just like, I'm sorry, I'm too old for this. I'm 33. I'm basically a shriveled up raisin. But I do like her writing, and I do like some of the more serious things that she tackles, I guess. Or at least she has tackled in her other books. I mean, in this one too. Okay, anyways. The premise of this one, there's this girl, Sloane, and her best friend, Emily, all of a sudden vanishes. And that's not uncommon for Emily and her parents to just all of a sudden be away for a weekend or 2 weeks or whatever on a trip, and then they come back and, you know, things are back to normal. Emily's not answering her phone, any texts. She's just completely off the grid, and Sloane can't get in touch with her. And so then one day she gets this letter from Emily, and all it is a list of things that she wants Sloane to do over the summer. So then Sloane goes on this, you know, journey over the summer to complete this list, because she thinks if she finishes this list, then it will give her a clue as to where Emily is, and then she can find her and be reunited with her. So that's where our story takes off. I listened to the audiobook of this while I was painting things. It was something to listen to anyway. So like, it's not bad. It's fine. It's just teenagers being teenagers, and the really unrealistic thing in this one is that like somehow conveniently there's like this group of 4 teens that like hang out, and none of them have parents that notice that they're gone until 3 a.m, or like don't care if they're gone all night. And I'm like, that is the most unrealistic thing I've ever read. That's the most unrealistic thing in this book. Who would I recommend this to? I don't know. Like, I think it would be okay for teenagers if you're still in that spot in life. And like, I remember feeling things that she's feeling in this book, and I could, like, 16-year-old me could relate to things that were happening in this book. So there's that. But that was half my lifetime ago, you know? So not anymore. So those were all of my June reads, and now we move on to July. The first weekend in July was a long weekend, Canada Day weekend, and because there was nothing happening, we stayed at home. And I read, and I decided that I was going to finish reading the Avatar The Last Airbender graphic novel series, and I did it. So I basically read one a day. One day I read two, and yeah, it was a treat. I'm not gonna hold them all up. It was very hard to do that one time. I'm not doing it again. Okay, so the first one is, or the second one, I read the first one, reread. In the past, I've read the first three. I reread the first one last fall, and now I've finally moved on. So this is volume 2, The Search, which is, each one kind of pulls one person and kind of looks at them more closely, but the whole gang is still there. This one more follows Zuko and Azula searching for their mother. These take place like right after the show ends. Did I say that? This is the second one. This is The Rift, focusing on Toph and Aang and a conflict that they're having. Number 4 is Smoke and Shadow. What was this one? May. Is it May or is it Mai? All of a sudden I can't remember. May and Zuko. And then this number 5 is North and South, which is focusing on Sokka and Katara. And then North and South Water Tribes. Okay. So, what do I want to say? There are more. These are all of the ones written by Jean Luen Yang. And so these are the ones that we have. We haven't continued collecting them since. And I'm going to put that down because those are heavy. Really enjoy them. If you're a fan of the show, Avatar The Last Airbender, I would absolutely recommend reading them because they're great. And they answer, you know, some questions that maybe you wanted answered by the end of the show. And they're answered. So they're really good. Really recommend them. The next book that I finished was Revenge of the Final Cafe by Stuart McLean. This was my Stuart McLean book for the year, which is silly that I only read one a year, but if you are not new, you will know of my love of the Final Cafe, which used to be a radio show. Stuart McLean passed away in 2017, I think. So the radio show is no longer going. But he would travel around Canada and do these shows, and part of his shows was that he would tell stories about this couple, Dave and Morley, and their family and their friends and community. And so these are just collections of, each book is a collection of these stories and just their misadventures, and they just are so cozy and comforting and silly and heartwarming, and I love them so much. And it's just great. You don't really need to pick up the books in any order. The kids are aging as the books go on, but it's not critical to read them in any particular order. So whatever you can find, read it first. You get the gist of the characters and their relationships to each other and who they are. So, you know, but yeah, I really enjoyed this. Again, short stories to read before bed. Perfect. I love it. Anyways, okay. The next book that I finished was Mostly Harmless by Douglas Adams, which I do have on my shelf somewhere. It's over there. Can you see it? You can't. Yeah, Chris and I were listening to the audiobooks narrated by Martin Freeman, except for book 1, which is narrated by Stephen Fry. And yeah, we finally finished the series. If you're not familiar with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I don't know if there's help for you. No, I'm just kidding. It's one of my all-time favorite series. I've read it so many times. And the first book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, is basically about this guy named Arthur. And he finds out one day that his best friend, Ford Prefect, is an alien and the Earth is about to be destroyed. And so Ford wants to rescue him. And they're trying to hitch a ride on a passing alien ship and hitch a ride off Earth, and they succeed before the Earth is destroyed. And so then Arthur's trying to figure out life in the galaxy without Earth. So that's how the book starts, or the series starts. And things are just ridiculous. So funny. The books are just, like, the things that happen are so bizarre and, like, hilarious. Anyways, so the last book is not my favorite. I feel like a lot of the things that happen, they don't really feel like connected to the overall plot of like the previous 4 books. I don't know. It's not my favorite, but it's still in my favorite series, so I do love it. And yeah, it took us a long time to finish the series because we were listening to them when we were going on road trips. So we last listened to book 4 in December when we went on a short road trip to a cabin, which was very nice. So I made Chris listen to this with me while we did puzzles. But yeah, so now we're done another round of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I really enjoyed it. The next book that I finished, essay collection, The Curse of the Boyfriend Sweater by Alana Okun. And that feels weird, but I said it right. It just feels weird. And this is a collection of essays about crafting, specifically knitting. She just mentioned other crafts that she's into. And you might, as a non-knitter, I am a knitter with a capital K. Knitting is a very important part of my life. You might, as a non-knitter, think that that sounds boring, but I think there's something in here for everyone. She's kind of taking these different things about knitting and crafting and like summing them up in ways that like I wish that I could sum them up and like describe them to people that might not know how that feels when you're a maker. And I just thought she did it so well. And then she also takes these themes, and like again explores different themes of like losing a loved one, mental illness, struggling with anxiety and depression, like losing friendships, and oh man, they're like other things, and like life changes, and like how your life changes as you get older, and all of a sudden you're like a different person than you were 10 years ago, and you're like, oh, how am I here? And just things like that. And the way that she wove everything together was so good. And yeah, I just loved it. And I really liked her writing as well. And I felt really connected to the things that she was talking about. Like a lot of them really resonated with me. Yeah, so I'm really glad that I finally picked this up and read it. I've owned it for a few years and I've wanted to read it for a while. So I would really recommend this one if you are a crafter of any kind, specifically if you're a knitter. I think you would really enjoy it. Yeah, I really loved it. Okay, we're gonna move on. Okay, so then the next book that I read was The Martian by Andy Weir. This was a reread for me. I was doing like a buddy read, group read along kind of thing on my channel. I don't think anyone read it with me. I think I just read it by myself. But that's okay. Just like Mark Watney, you know? So this is one of my favorite books. Apparently, this was only my second time reading it. I thought for sure this was my third, but according to Goodreads, it's only my second. And I only read it right before the movie came out, which is like, wow, I thought I read it before the movie was announced, but apparently not. So yeah, The Martian. Our main character, Mark Watney, is on a manned mission to Mars, and there's this big storm that threatens their ability to leave. So they're gonna do an emergency evacuation of Mars, and something happens to Mark, and he ends up getting separated from everyone. They think he's dead, and so they leave, but he's not dead, and so he is trapped on Mars with no way of leaving, and he has to survive until Earth can get help to him. So that's where our story starts. And this book is so science heavy, and I got into it I was like maybe this far, and I was like, dang, there's so much science. Like, how did I like this? But then I remembered as I kept reading, it's like, oh yes, no, this is great. And somehow, like, with all of the science that he has to figure out, science and math, to figure out how to stay alive on Mars, there's still so much heart to it, and it's funny, and it's an engaging story, and you just keep turning the pages. I read this so fast. Like, I have not been reading very fast lately, but I read this in like 4 days, which is rare for me lately. And so it was so great. And like, I've read this before, I've watched the movie a few times, and still at the end I was like, what's gonna happen? So how does this work? So I really love it. So that was a great book. Okay, so the next book that I finished was Is It Just Me by Miranda Hart. And I love Miranda Hart. She's a British comedian. She's very funny. She has a show. I was introduced to her by one of my best friends who is really into British comedy, panel shows, game shows, all of it. And she introduced me to Miranda Hart through her show that she had on the BBC, which is just called Miranda. It's a sitcom based on things that have happened in her life, kind of. And this book, Is It Just Me, is her memoir, reflection on some of these things. And a lot of the stories that she tells in this book, you're like, oh, this happened in the show. This happened. I see where the inspiration for that part in the show came from this story. So there's that. I thought it was really funny. I bought it on a Kindle deal, so it was well worth the $2 or $3 that I spent on it. I would recommend to people that like British comedy and funny essays, I guess, and memoirs. I think she's super funny. I really like her outlook on life. Her whole thing is like, you know, have fun in life. You know, what's the point in being all stuffy and serious? Like, have fun with life. So I really like that. Okay, and the next book that I finished, Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. I finally finished. I'm not sure what that was coming out of my mouth. I finally finished Mansfield Park. So now I've read all of Jane Austen's novels. I just feel so accomplished. I started this in April, and then it was Jane Austen July, and I still hadn't finished it. And also I picked this for the second booktube spin. This was the one that it landed on, and just all of these factors were like, okay, you're finishing this book, and I finally did. I read about half of it with my eyes, and then I had to listen to the audiobook by narrated by Juliet Stevenson. She did a great job, just because I wasn't sitting down and getting through it, and I didn't have the brain space to translate Jane Austen into my head for like relaxing reading, because I haven't read this before. I didn't know the story or the things that were going to happen, so that also helps me. Like Pride and Prejudice, I've watched the movie so many times, and I've read the book quite a few times, so I know that story, so I can follow along. But this one was totally new to me, so then I needed more brain space to translate her language, if that makes sense. Yeah, so the audiobook was good, and I really like the story. I think I might be Fanny Price. For sure 18-year-old Felicia was Fanny Price. I just saw so much of myself in her. I was like, wow, this is amazing how similar I was at that age to this character. So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of hate for this book, or at least non-appreciation of this book, because you kind of start off the book not hearing from Fanny's perspective. So it starts off, she's 8 or 10, and she goes to live with her rich aunt and uncle, because her family is kind of poor, and they have like 8 kids. So her mom sends her to live with her rich aunt and uncle so that she can kind of grow up in their home and have the advantages of their children, and have just like a better life. And so she grows up in this household. And so you hear more from, at the beginning, you hear more from like her aunts, her mom's other sister. Her husband was the clergyman of the I forget the words. The rectory on the property? Whatever. He was the clergyman. And so her two aunts are there. So I don't know what's happening right now. Her two aunts are there kind of caring for her and raising her. And her one aunt is just like the absolute worst person in the world. And her other aunt is like so henpecked that from her sister that she just, whatever. She's not as bad, but it's like she doesn't know. Anyways, so you don't hear from Fanny at first, but as the book goes along, and she's just like this really meek and timid girl. She's just really quiet and introverted. And I'm like, girl, same. People see her so being so chaste and stuff, but she's like, that was me. So it's not unrealistic for someone to be like that. As the book goes on, as Fanny grows in confidence and more awareness of who she is, without all of these other influences on her, you hear more from her voice, and then finally she does actually become the main character in her own story. So it's interesting. And it's not as funny. There are funny moments in here. It's not as funny as some of Jane Austen's other books, and it is longer, but I think it's worth the read, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I read it. And I don't know, I loved it, so whatever. I don't have anything else to say about it. Okay, so then the last book that I've finished in July was Confessions of a Shopaholic by Sophie Kinsella. I basically read this in 24 hours. Because I think I read about, I actually really only read like the first 6 pages on a Thursday before bed, and then I fell asleep. And then the next day, Chris and I were in the city with a couple appointments, and so I brought it and I read it while I was waiting for my appointments. And then we got home and I basically read it, and then the next morning I finished reading it. So it was basically within 24 hours. Yeah, so I am doing a project where over the course of time, it's not a set length of time that I want to do it. I want to reread all of Sophie Kinsella's books because a lot of them I haven't read since they've been published. I've always read her books as they've been published, basically since like the 3rd Shopaholic book. And yeah, so I just want to see if I still like them, and I am still liking them. This one stresses me out. I gave it an extra star on Goodreads for the nostalgia and the writing, but like the actual plot stresses me the frick out because our main character Becky is a shopaholic, and basically you get insight into her brain of her thought process while she's out shopping and like spending money, and she keeps telling you these dollar amounts, these pound amounts, which is like astronomical, and she just is like so much debt. And it's just horrific. It's like, no, Becky, stop shopping. But then she buys the thing and you're like, no, you're so poor. And so the story is like her working at a financial magazine. She literally has the worst spending personality ever. So she's like a sham at her job. But she's a reporter and a journalist, and she goes and reports on things that are in her magazine, and then she goes shopping in between, and getting broker and broker, more and more broke as the days go on. And the way that I'm describing it sounds terrible. It is a fun book, and she just gets into these crazy hijinks and mishaps that are just like, girl, what are you doing? How is this even possible? But it's very funny. I do like Sophie Kinsella's writing a lot, and I like the characters that she creates. Just this particular situation was very stressful for me because, yeah. And there is romance in here, but it's actually not the main plot point. Yeah, so I did enjoy it a lot, but also I was stressed out. But I mean, I read this in 24 hours. So that should tell you about the addictive nature of her writing for me. Okay, yeah, so those are all the books that I read in June and July. Thank you for watching this long video. I would love to hear what you read in the last 2 months. If there's anything that you particularly enjoyed or that you think I would like, or anything that you particularly hated. Like, tell me about anything that you hated. I would love to hear that as well. And why you hated it. You can feel free to rant in the comment section. And if you've read any of these books or you're going to pick them up now based on my recommendation, I would love to hear that as well. I'd love to chat with you guys in the comments. Yeah, so thanks for watching, and until next time, so long, thanks for all the fish.